Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on this bill and continue on from the contribution from the Leader of Greens that this bill does indeed help some people, and I'm sure that there will be some in our community who will welcome the initiatives that the government have put forward. But it doesn't help many, many Tasmanians, and I want to take some time, Mr Speaker, to consider and reflect on what some of the people who've come through my electorate office are experiencing at the moment with the housing disaster that we have in this state. It's not a housing crisis anymore. I think it's gone beyond a crisis to an absolute disaster. And I think it's important to take the time to tell their stories, to remind people in this House that whilst we can do something with this bill, and indeed we will, to assist some Tasmanians, there is a great deal more that we need to do. I want to tell the story of 4 people in particular that have come through my electorate office, and I'll change their names, Mr Speaker, just to maintain the confidentiality, but their stories are common stories, sadly. Stories that so many families would be facing, and I'm sure if anyone was listening to this debate today or reading it later in Hansard, they would see similarities with their own lives. The first person I want to speak about I will call Sarah. And I handed a letter to the Minister on Tuesday, regarding Sarah. And I want to read that letter out because I think it really does tell a very important story. Dear Minister, today my office met with Sarah and heard of the desperate situation she is currently experiencing, which sees her sleeping on a mattress in one small room with her 4 children, aged 11, 10, 7 and 5. Sarah and her family previously lived in a 3-bedroom private rental in Berrydale. However, like many Tasmanians, Sarah and her family were forced to leave their home due to the property agent's intention to raise the rent to an amount of $700 per week. Facing the prospect of homelessness, Sarah gratefully accepted an offer from her uncle to move herself and her children into his 2-bedroom social housing unit in Glenorchy, and the family have lived there for the past 4 months. The sleeping arrangements are deplorable and totally unacceptable. Sarah and her 4 children sleep on a mattress crammed onto the floor of 1 bedroom. One can only imagine the stress and anxiety this is causing the young family. Sarah's 7-year-old son, and I shall call him Matthew, was born with meningitis and has suffered a number of health issues during his young life. Matthew also suffers from epilepsy and is undergoing an assessment for autism. Through the NDIS, Matthew is eligible for at-home sessions with a support worker, which are very beneficial. But unfortunately, NDIS have ceased this service as Matthew is not classified as being in his own home. External NDIS appointments for Matthew are not an option due to this being an extremely traumatic and triggering experience for him. This is extremely shattering for Sarah, who worries greatly for Matthew's immediate future without the benefits of these in-home professional support sessions. The Housing Tasmania property where the family live with Sarah's uncle is located in Glenorchy and was previously renovated to suit a tenant with disabilities. Housing Tasmania have already indicated their interest in moving Sarah's uncle to a 1-bedroom property to enable a tenant with special needs to take up residence. Should this occur, Sarah and her children will be rendered homeless. Desperate to do all she can for her family, Sarah engaged the service of support worker from Catholic Care at the advice of Housing Tasmania. Unfortunately, Sarah tells my office that her support worker advised her that he's closing her file because as nothing more can be done. Sarah also advises that she has an active social housing application for a 5-bedroom property but would accept 4 bedrooms, has selected a broad range of suburbs and engages regularly with Housing Connect, who are aware of her situation. Sarah is also the victim of domestic violence and a family violence order is currently in place on her ex-husband. Minister, Sarah and her young children are in this desperate situation through no fault of their own. A young Tasmanian family of 5 living in 1 bedroom and sleeping on the floor in the year 2022 is truly heartbreaking. I respectfully request an urgent update on Sarah's application and any further information that can assist this desperate young family. I acknowledge I only gave that to the Minister on Tuesday and I'm still waiting on a response. But it is typical of the kinds of stories that I am seeing constantly through my office. Another one, I'll call this gentleman John, is a single father of 3 children, twins aged 13 and a 9-year-old girl. He took sole custody of the children at the advice from Child Protection. His 9-year-old daughter was sexually assaulted by the children's uncle. He was forced to move in with his elderly father. John and his family have been sleeping on the floor on a mattress since he applied for social housing assistance over 3 years ago. John has been diagnosed with wedge compression fractures in his spine due to his poor sleeping support. The 2 girls share a room and the son in another very small room. The son has ADHD and no space for him to self-regulate. John is desperate. His family are desperate. Another story, Wendy, I'll call this person. Wendy was attacked and beaten around the head with a hammer when she was 15 years old and left for dead on the banks of the Derwent River. She spent 3 months in hospital and was left with an acquired brain injury. She entered a relationship in her early 20s, subjected to repeated acts of physical, sexual and psychological domestic violence. She's single with a young child and on a disability pension, and she's applied for housing assistance on 19th of June 2015. She's been paying private rent ever since. However, rent increases are now making general living unaffordable. She can't afford her daily bills. She requires ongoing treatment and medication, which is expensive, and she has to choose between a roof over her head and her medication. And she unfortunately is regularly having to enter into loan agreements to purchase basic household items for her daughter. And finally, I want to tell the story of Jane. Jane is a domestic violence survivor. Her ex-husband had a drug addiction, which meant that she was left with nothing after her divorce. She lived in her car for 6 months. She suffers from PTSD and depression. She was unable to find employment because she was living in a car. She followed all the advice from Housing Tas. She had a broad range of suburb selection. She ran them twice a week, engaged with a support worker, did all the right things. She's currently in a women's shelter. No hope. Still waiting. These are the stories of real Tasmanians, Mr. Speaker. Real Tasmanians who deserve so much more. So much more. Yet this government continues to reject proposals put forward that would see homes opened up immediately to help these real Tasmanians. It's really easy to look at bills, such as the one before us, and to applaud them and to say that this is great and in the long term it's going to release more houses into the market and increase supply. It's much harder, though, to sit down with real Tasmanians, as I do in my electorate office, and hear their stories, and to say to them, I simply don't have an answer for you about what to do tonight. That's much harder. So whilst I will support this bill, I encourage and urge and plead with this government to give serious considerations to proposals which would release homes right now, to regulate and limit short stay accommodation to the owner's principal place of residence, to look at empty houses. Approximately 2,000 homes across Tasmania are sitting empty at the moment. Yet we've got these poor people, Sarah, John, Wendy and Jane, and their families doing it incredibly tough. Incredibly tough. It's heartbreaking. Please do more. You have to do more. Too many Tasmanians are suffering. So I support this bill, but I really hope that my pleas, and I know the pleas of the opposition and the Greens, and indeed of so many Tasmanians, aren't going to fall on deaf ears again, because it's not good enough. I don't want to have to sit through more conversations with constituents who are heartbroken, who are desperate, whose children are going without. It's not good enough. It's not good enough for Tasmanians. in 2022 to be in this position. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.